Welcome to your Next Stop podcast. Welcome back to your Next Stop season 5. I mean, how crazy is that? With an amazing guest who I absolutely adore, Joanna Kleinman. How are you?
I'm doing great. I am so excited to be here today.
I know. So I want people to be able to find you. We're going to get into the mind method, but then you're an author, podcast host, and a psychotherapist.
That's right. Yes.
I love saying that because I always am like, oh, it's so cool, right?
Yeah.
They can find you at Dethroning Your Inner Critic on Instagram. They can find you on LinkedIn under your name. Your book is Dethroning Your Inner Critic. Your podcast is Dethroning Your Inner Critic. And we're going to get into the mind method, which is so fascinating. We connected years and years and years ago. And I feel like we've always, we always keep in touch with each other through kind of social media, kind of keeping a pulse on what each other are doing. And you have been on your Next Stop before. I believe it was like season 2.
Oh, yeah. It was a while ago.
Yes. And you also, it was right when your book was coming out. And you also gave your book to the event that I did at the Super Bowl for the NFL women, which was everyone was so excited about that. And I know you have evolved even more. And this is what kind of season 5, there's a couple of different angles I'm taking. And one of them is bringing back some of my favorite guests from over the years and just touching base with them to see where they are. Yeah. Because I love that evolution. I love that kind of that history timeline that we can do, which I think is fascinating in 30 years, that we can also just go back and be like, oh my God, look where we are. That whole evolution really is cool. So
for sure.
I'm so happy to have you again. So happy to see your face. And I want to dive into it. So take us really, you can give a tiny bit of background of who you are, but if people really want to get into the fullness, they can go back to your episode in season 2, but just a little bit of history, kind of where you grew up and all that. And then I want to take it from like the book came out and then like where you went.
Absolutely. So, everything really actually began for me at 9 years old. Okay. My mother still is a brilliant psychotherapist. My father was an attorney, but was sort of diving into the realm of self-help and self-exploration, mostly because, the truth is my parents' marriage was about to be kaput. So, we're going back to 1979. Anyway, long story short, that was the beginning of transformational thinking. And I will never forget, I was 13 years old and I was actually sort of in this seminar that was for adults. I was, sitting there with my parents and I watched this woman within a minute have a fundamental shift of the way that she saw herself and her life that just opened up this possibility that didn't exist prior to her having this shift. And it was in that moment that I said, that's what I'm going to do for the rest of my life. So I became a psychotherapist. And long story short, I was, I had a private practice as a psychotherapist for many years. But one of the things that I felt is that in traditional psychotherapy, and I think also in some forms of traditional coaching as well, people just, they want to deal with the situation at hand. They want to feel better about this particular situation. And I believe that any situation that we're dealing with, it's not the situation at hand, okay? It's way deeper issues that go way beyond just the tip of the iceberg. And if we're able to really understand the workings of what I'm going to call our automatic mind, because our mind just thinks automatically. 50,000 times a day, our mind just goes to thoughts. And we think we're having new thoughts. We're not. Right? It's basically the things that really stir us up. My boss said this, my brother said that, my son said this, whatever happens, there's something deeper. And when you can really understand the mechanisms, the machinery of your mind, you're never getting rid of that machinery. See, that's the other thing. People want to fix their thoughts, change their thoughts, get rid of their self-doubt, get rid of their lack of confidence. And that's where people get into trouble. So and we can, certainly dive into the mind method, but the bottom line is,
No, I
it is
definitely want to
about,
dive into that. Please.
yeah, it's about understanding that you have an automatic mind that will be with you forever. And when you intimately know it, what it says, why it says it, who triggers it, what triggers it, and what's the deeper underlying issue, in that moment, you can unhook yourself and tune into very different thoughts that create different emotions, that have you making different choices and taking different actions and engaged in different behaviors that have your life going in a fundamentally different direction in every important area of your life, from your relationships to your career to your sense of self to everything in between.
Yeah. And it really is. I mean, that's the thing that's so fascinating. And I think as we evolve, we become a little bit more aware of our thoughts. But I love that you as a kid, because of the way you're also wired, and then your parents and the experiences you were going through with them, that you were able to kind of make that connection, because I
Yes.
think it's so important for people to be self-aware. I mean, I think when you are self-aware is
Yes.
when you're the healthiest. That's in my
For
opinion.
sure.
And I am not a psychotherapist, but
I you are spot on. The way that I distinguish it is, either you're living a life on autopilot or you're living a life of consciousness, right?
yes.
Awareness. And by the way, we're always going in between the two. Even if we're living a conscious, aware life, right? We're always getting sucked back into that automatic mind. And so that's really the work, right? There's no such thing as, I'm going to be, perfectly self-aware and I'm going to be conscious all the time. And so I'm going to live this great life and I'm never going to get triggered and I'm never going to go back into self-doubt. I mean, that doesn't exist.
Right.
Yeah. So
Especially if we're evolving, right? I mean, especially if we're evolving as humans, you're going to all of a sudden be like, okay, I took off, I didn't mean to interrupt you, but like
no, please.
I took a chunk off of this in my life and I'm going over here. And then all of a sudden you're building a whole new set of tools of self-awareness. But when the better that you can be at understanding and feeling, oh, wait a second, this is happening in my body or this is happening in my mind. Wait, pause, right?
Yeah.
Pause, because
Yeah.
I need to get back and get back on that path. It's almost like, you're veering off here, you're veering off here. So I think the work that you're doing is so important on so many levels. And I
Thank
do feel
you.
like over the years, it has gotten, it has definitely got more prevalent. People are talking about it more, but then I also think there's more people in the space that are actually not as qualified to do it.
I agree.
Right.
I totally agree. Yes, for
And
sure.
yeah, so if someone's listening to this right now and they're like, you know what, I kind of need this. I love what Joanna just said. What are some of the things that they can look for in a psychotherapist or a coach or something like that, that they can
Mm,
know, you know what, I feel good? Because not everyone, people are going to connect with different people, but you want to make sure the person you're connecting with is actually legitimate.
for sure. Um, this is my opinion, okay? But I don't think that we can separate mind, body, spirit. Okay. So I think that right, certainly how I practice and how I would advise somebody to look for a coach or a psychotherapist is, do they have the awareness of, not just transforming the way that you think, but also really understanding what's going on in your nervous system, what's going on in your body, where, what are the traumas that you store? Because we all have trauma. There's no human that escapes trauma, right? And so it's very hard to make fundamental changes in the most significant areas of your life if you're not really exploring what I'm going to say is trauma from a very early age. And when I say trauma, okay, I mean, it could be your mother gave the last stick of gum to your brother, okay? But right? So it's not that some horrible, awful thing happened. It's the way as children that we process what goes on in our life and what we make it mean about us, and we don't even realize that we've done that. And then we're taking that with us throughout life. So that's the most important thing to really understand, right? That whoever you're working with needs to understand. how do you really see that deeper core pain that's getting in the way of whatever it is that you're dealing with in this very moment?
I love that because that's one of the things that I talk about in my podcast with dyslexia, blindness, is that we all have trauma.
Yes.
And sometimes when you say that to someone, they're going to think, oh, wait, you were like severely abused as a child, right? Because
Right.
people go to like the craziest, the most gruesome trauma. And
Absolutely.
we talk about it all the time. Like I had, my parents did get divorced and there was stuff in our house, that coming with that, there was trauma obviously that we picked up. But then
Yeah.
being dyslexic in school, the
Sure.
amount of times I had trauma. So then when you talk about it and someone's like, oh, I see. And I'm like, and all
Yeah.
of that time when the trauma builds and builds and builds and you
Yes.
don't deal with it is when it becomes a problem. Like, you have to talk
Yeah.
about it. You have to work with someone to help you kind of navigate it. And I think we talked about this before, but if we didn't, I would love for you to touch on this as well. Because a lot of times when people are thinking about getting into some sort of coaching therapy, whatever it
Mm-hmm.
is that they think, okay, well, I blocked a lot of stuff out, right? That's what happens
Yes.
when you have trauma. I
Yes.
always talk about the feelings, like, so the feelings that you have, like when you think about, like in a situation, like whenever I think about third grade, I get this like really bad, like agita. And I wasn't aware. I was like, what the hell happened in third grade? Why do I keep getting like that? Right. And I had to
Right.
do the work to kind of figure it out. And that's really when everyone went to gifted and talented. I had to go to special reading. So it was like this big
Mm-hmm.
pivotal moment in my educational world, right? But it took me a long
Yes.
time to remember. I had the memory feeling,
Yeah.
so I had the memory, the actual visual memory of it, but I didn't
Yeah.
realize the feeling was kind of disconnected. I disconnected the feeling from the memory. So I could tell the story. And then when I was doing a lot of stuff with the podcast, which I didn't realize I was actually doing some healing when and we're still doing it, but there's healing that
Mm.
happens because I was able to talk about some of these situations
Yep.
and be like, oh, and kind of do it through myself. But that's because I'm very self aware, right? I've
Right.
done a lot of the work on myself.
Right.
But again, as you said, the trauma can be just as simple as something that happened in your house that your mom wasn't doing that on purpose, right? She
No,
wasn't doing it on purpose, but you internalized it. So I love
that's
how
right.
you picture that. So if someone's like, I would like to dive into that, I feel like I have some unresolved stuff.
Yes.
It's kind of looking and asking some questions. Like, do you have specific questions that you think someone can ask a coach or psychotherapist
Sure.
off the bat?
Well, yeah, so here's where I think my work is a little bit different, okay? Because I don't believe that you need to go back and dissect what happened and spend all this time spinning in the past. What, here's what we're interested in. We're interested in, I want to feel better and think better now because I got shit to do, right? I've got to build that business and
I
I've got
love
to
it.
write that book and I've got to, get my marriage back on track and I've got to be a better mom or, whatever it is. I've got a vision and I want to get on with that vision. Okay. So I don't think that you really need to spend a whole lot of time going back. Okay. But what's interesting is when you start talking about what's going on now. Okay. You start here, what's going on now. And you start, I always think about it like a thread of a sweater. You keep pulling the thread of the sweater, it all starts to unravel. So you start here, you start in the present, and you actually start from, what do I want? What's the vision that I want? Okay. So now we've got right. So that's what I would say. And this is where, the questions that you're addressing, I don't consider myself to be a traditional. I think that my approach is psychotherapy meets like life coaching meets NLP meets neuroplasticity, meets spirituality. Okay, so again, I would say when you're looking for somebody, maybe also to not look for either somebody who doesn't go back to the past, right? Because we've got to have the past inform who we are now and what we're creating. But then you've also got to understand if you're hiring a coach and you're not doing any of that deeper work, you'll get to where you're going. There's no doubt. Okay. If we've got a vision, we'll get there. But that's not the point. So most people want to get to they want to produce the result. Okay. Once I start this business, once I make my first million, once I launch the book, once I lose the weight, once I get there, that's going to be the thing that's going to make me feel the way I want to feel. So let me hire somebody to figure out how to get there. And that's our culture breeds that. And this is why so many people are miserable, particularly the people, right, that have checked off a lot of the boxes. I've got the beautiful, house, and I've got the gorgeous car, and I've got the money, and I've got all the things. But they're so fundamentally dissatisfied and unfulfilled, right? And I want to change that. I want to fundamentally change how people understand how to consciously think so that they can design their dreams, right? That's what the D step is, by the way. We'll get to that, but D step is design your life, right? So designing your life from a place of wholeness now and gratitude now and fulfillment now. And it doesn't mean that your shame and your doubt and your lack of confidence aren't continuing to circle around in your mind.
Right.
But they no longer have to impact how you experience your journey moving forward.
Yeah, no, I love that. So take us through the mind method, and then I want to get into, why you started the podcast and the book and how that kind of ties into. But let's start with the mind method.
Absolutely. Okay, so first I want to say it's a 4-step process, but it's a 4-step process that is forever and ever and ever, right? So it's not like I'm going to do these 4 steps and then I'm fixed and then I'm handled and then that's it, right? So it's a method that just like exercise, right? You got to lift the weights. You keep engaging in this, methodology. So the first step is the M step, meet your inner critic. That is where you really understand exactly your inner critic, and your ego. Okay. It's kind of the same thing. We could say your inner critic, we could say your unconscious mind, we could say your ego. It's all the same thing. Okay. So you're really understanding what are those thoughts and beliefs that keep circulating, like a vicious cycle over and over and over. I had a 7-year-old version of the same thoughts. I had a 22-year-old version of the same thoughts. I had a 38-year-old version of the same thoughts, right? I'm 50, almost 54. I have a 54, almost 54-year-old version of the same thoughts, right? So we really understand all of that. The I step is investigate the indication signs. I call those the blinking red lights that alert you that your inner critic has taken over your mind. Your automatic mind is in control, okay? Those are the emotions, the body sensations, and the behaviors, right? Like you want to, polish off the bottle of wine, or you want to just disconnect from everybody, or you're exhausted, or you want to, lash out at your partner or your children, or what, right? Or some things that are self-destructive. So that's the I step. And also, where is that in your body? When you feel that, like, where do you feel it? In your chest, in your stomach, and, the N step is neutralize the never-ending message. Okay. The never-ending message is really the core pain that really serves as the lens through which we see everything and we don't know it. So when we're triggered, as I said before, by our boss, by our partner, by, it doesn't matter whom, when we're triggered, really triggered, that never-ending message is at play. In some way, we think, right? And then we want to blame somebody else. How dare you disrespect me? How dare you treat me that way? Okay. What we want to get to is, even when somebody treats you in a way that's unacceptable, and you need to set a boundary, that you don't lose yourself in the process, that you don't lose your grounding and your inner knowing that you know you're enough. You don't need anybody else to think you're enough, to think you're fabulous, to want you, to love you, right? And that's fundamental to human nature, right? We've got this DNA that wants approval and acceptance and validation, right? Anybody that's walking around saying, I don't care at all what people think, somewhere you do, because it's human nature, right? So the end step is really understanding your trigger is yours. And if you keep blaming other people, how dare this person trigger me? You'll be right about what a jerk they are. That's fine. But you're the one that's going to suffer. So when we use the M and the I and the N all together, okay, we understand the thoughts, we understand the beliefs, we understand the emotions, we understand the body sensations, we understand the behaviors, we understand the deeper core triggers. Now we start to practice unhooking ourselves from that automatic mind as soon as it grabs us by the throat. And what starts to happen is you start to have more access to gratitude, to peace. Okay. You start to show up in the world differently. You start to handle situations and circumstances differently than you did. And the last thing I want to say about the design your life piece is that everything is energy, right? We're made of energy. People are made of energy. So when we are in the energy of gratitude and joy and peace, that's a very different way to go through life. And like energy attracts like energy. So when you are accessing that energy in your body because you are intentionally plugging into different thoughts and beliefs in everything that's going on in your mind, 6 months later, you're not the same human. And something shows up in your life, and all of a sudden you're like, wow, 6 months ago, I would have handled that fundamentally differently. And that's growth.
Yeah. So true. It's so true. And I love that. And you really painted that really well, because that is like exactly what you can picture yourself going through that. So when did you decide, okay, I'm going to start a podcast, and then the book that I know came out, years later, but what was the thoughts behind those two avenues?
The thought behind those two avenues were, I am not good enough for any of this. I was not good at technology. When I remember like literally unwrapping the Yeti microphone and like sweating, and my heart was like racing out of my body. Like, I don't know how, like, what am I doing? I don't know how to do this. Right. Mm-hmm. And the same thing I had for years and years and years. I wanted to write a book, but I'm not an author. Like, I'm a pretty good writer, but what am I doing? Right. And so the mind method kind of came about from my own journey of, I'm scared to death and I'm going to just be afraid in the horrible, that feeling of self-doubt and dread, and I'm going to fail and this is not going to go well and people are going to think this and that and the other, and just taking each step. And, I wrote my book in 2020. I think I started the podcast maybe the year before, or I don't know, 2 years before.
Well, I think we started our, the podcast, I feel like we're similar. And I don't even remember, I have to go back and listen, where we connected. I mean, it must have been on LinkedIn, or was it Clubhouse? No, you were.
Juliet, I have, obviously we were meant to be. We were completely meant to be. But I cannot, I remember having conversations with you. I have zero idea where we connected.
I know. I'm going to go back and listen, because I want to say it was maybe Clubhouse, because I feel like you were in that group of amazing people that I met in Clubhouse.
Right.
And one of the things that's really fun is my journey has been the same kind of as yours, in just a different way, where I just kept taking the steps forward and being like, I don't think I should be doing this, but okay, I feel like this is what I'm being pulled, right? And I'm going to just do it because I want to help more people be able to do it as well. And as my podcast kind of evolved, it was really me turning a passion into a business. And so
Yes.
then it just kept going and going and going, and it's still
Yes.
evolving. I mean, as you know,
It's
my listeners know, I mean,
still
now, I'm the chief
work.
communications officer for Fat Tech, which I was not going to be working for anyone else. My storytelling business was doing really, really well, which evolved from the podcast. But then
Correct.
Danielle and I, obviously we have a connection from high school, but then when we reconnected, we just brainstormed, and then she hired me as her storytelling consultant, and then was like,
Yeah,
wait a second, no, I need you to work for us. So it's just this interesting kind of path, and that's where the self-awareness and
for sure.
the also, like, I mean, I know there's people that we both have talked to, right, that are like, I just don't have the same balls as you, I could just never do it. And I'm like,
Yeah.
well, no, it's not like, yeah, I mean, sometimes it's still where, I mean, I'm on, especially with FedTech, talking to scientists in the government, and I'm like,
Absolutely. Wow.
I
Yes.
I have, it's, someone else would say, you have no business doing that, but I know what I can bring to the table. I know what my strengths are because of being
Yes.
self-aware. I also know that I have a lot of weaknesses because of my dyslexia. However,
Sure.
some of my strengths are now because of my weaknesses and dyslexia, because it's things I've worked on. So it's the
Yes.
self-awareness of knowing, you know what, I don't know, but I
Mhm.
also know that I have confidence in myself that I'll figure it out if
Yes.
that is the path that I'm supposed to be on.
Absolutely.
Right.
There are people out there that absolutely, they're like, I do have a set of balls on me, right? I am not one of those people. Okay. And so,
Right.
and by the way, I work, those are the kinds of people that come into my programs,
Right.
right? I know I have a bigger vision, and I really am scared, and right. And I don't believe that there are some people that are, destined to do things and some people that aren't, because you really can develop fundamentally different neural pathways in your brain that have you thinking fundamentally differently about who you are and what's possible for you. Our sense of self is really just well-worn neural pathways in our brain that we've had the same thoughts and beliefs since we've been like 4 or 5 years old, and we don't recognize it, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so when you're doing this work and you're plugging into different thoughts and beliefs, by the way, it doesn't feel normal. It doesn't feel natural. It feels really uncomfortable. What feels way more comfortable and familiar is all right, that well-worn neural pathway. And so this work, it's hard work, right? But we're designed as human beings to stay in comfort, right? That's our primitive brain wants to keep us in a state of comfort, okay? And if you're really tapping into your true potential as a human being, that's not comfortable.
Right.
So you can either choose a life of comfort, or you can choose a life of possibility, but you cannot have both at the same time. I'm sorry to say.
Right.
And by comfort, what I mean is predictability. Because we all know that many people, they may be taking the safe path, right? They're just staying in the job because, well, I don't love it, but it's comfortable. Or, I'm not going to really do anything in my relationship. It's fine. And that's a fine life. But I wouldn't say just kind of coasting through life is a comfortable life. It's a familiar life, just not necessarily a happy,
Well, I was going
you
to
know.
say, right, if you're not happy, like people that just kind
Yeah,
of go through the motions because it's like what they do, like, to me that's boring. But that's
boring.
also because, I am someone with a little bit of some balls, and I do sometimes jump in with 2 feet and being like, oh wait, I don't know what I'm doing, but I know I'll
Yes,
figure it out. But that's, again, because of my dyslexia and having to always figure things out. But that's a
right.
neuropath, right? That's something that I've put in my brain. It's like, okay, I maybe can't, I can't kind of put my faith in a teacher helping me. This teacher doesn't get me. I have to figure it out myself. So even though,
That's
like,
right.
you could say, oh, boo-hoo on the teacher. Well, you know what? Maybe it wasn't the worst thing for me, because then I realized, okay, I can do some of this myself. No one really understands me in this world. I have to figure it out myself, right? And
Yes.
so
Yes.
I love all of that you said. And I know when we originally talked, because it was right when the book, I believe, came out, and you had said, like, this was scary. This was really
Yes.
hard. This was
Oh,
really, really
yeah.
hard.
Yes. Yes. And I'm now, and now it's, I don't know. I think I've sold several thousand books worldwide by at this point. And, I mean, that's like just on Amazon. Right.
Right.
And um, that wasn't predictable. Right. And it is just, and I've got a lot more things that I'm working on now. Right. I'm sort of at the bottom of the next mountain. And what's fundamentally different now is because I've climbed certain mountains. Now that I'm at the bottom of the next mountain, I can just keep going, and I can let my life unfold however it's going to unfold. Of course, I need to keep taking actions that are in alignment with with my vision. But the biggest breakthrough, and I don't mean just for me, this is the fundamental part of the work that I do, with people in the world, is that while you're taking actions, your automatic mind, that inner critic mind, has a lot of attachments and demands about how all of this should go. A lot of ideal pictures, right? And that's the very thing that causes us to stay in a heightened state of anxiety and unhappiness, because we can be taking these amazing actions, but our automatic mind keeps the focus on, okay, you've got to, keep making sure that it goes exactly the way that you want it to, so that you won't feel that fundamental pain going all the way back to childhood. You won't feel that pain that you've been running away from for your whole life, right? So it's almost like, while we're building this amazing life, we're continuing to run away from what I think is a deep sense of, it's shame, basically, right? Like, I don't want anybody to think that I'm stupid, or I'm not good enough, or I don't have what it takes, or I'm not lovable, or I'm unworthy. And if that still is so unbearable, then that's the thing that's running every part of your life. So embracing the wholeness of you, right? The warts, the parts of you that you don't want anybody to see, right? Like, so for me, that was, I can be selfish. I can be self-centered. I can be forgetful. I can be scattered. And if I couldn't integrate, yeah, that's me too. And I just needed everybody to see how accomplished I am and how successful I am. And I couldn't let anybody see into the real me, right? That part of me would run my life. And that's what so many people are doing.
Yeah.
And they don't know it.
They don't know it. No, 100%. They don't know it. So can you take us through a little bit of what I know you've been doing a lot of speaking. So can you
Yes.
so someone that's like, okay, I want to take a dive, and I always wanted to speak, and I always wanted to do this. Can you take us through how it came about for you, but then also, what you're doing, so people can also follow?
Yeah, absolutely. Okay. So you can probably relate to this, but life just sort of presents these opportunities, right? And we have to do all of the prep work before, but we never know where life is going to take us. Okay. So, I've been the keynote speaker for Microsoft about 3 times. I've been the keynote speaker for NFL Films twice. I just finished a few months ago. I was the keynote speaker for Sanofi Healthcare. And this is all because people have heard of me. And many years ago, that was a dream, right? And I had no idea, like, how am I even going to do that? Okay. And when we think about how am I going to do that, okay, like if we're standing here and it's like this dream, that's what stresses us out. We can know what is the very next step to take, but we can't know what's the fifth or sixth or seventh step to take. And many people think I have to have the whole plan figured out to get from point A to point Q.
Right.
And that's just not how it goes. Okay. So how I got into Microsoft was I was working out with somebody next to somebody, not even somebody, I wasn't working out with her. We started up a conversation and she invited me to come speak for something. And then the rest is history, right? Sanofi heard of me through this person, this person, this person. NFL Films. Actually, I led a retreat in Costa Rica, and one of the executives from NFL Films happened to be on the Costa Rica retreat and said, I want you to come in. This is how life goes. And so, so the bottom of the mountain that I'm on now is this October, I'm going to be launching the Mind Method certification program.
Oh, very
for
cool.
people who want to understand how to take the Mind Method into their businesses, right? Whether in their corporate business or as a coach or a therapist, or right. I have nutritionists that are interested in incorporating anybody that wants to take this idea of integrating, you know, a 4-step approach to transforming mind, body, spirit. And I'm, you know, I mean, I've got a big vision and I'm just like, how do you eat an elephant? One bite at a time.
Right.
that's what I'm doing. And it's scary and it's exciting. And my automatic mind pulls me into doubt and fear. But the difference is now I know what that is. And so I don't go down the rabbit hole with it.
Right.
And that's really the difference. I used to go down the rabbit hole with it. I don't do that anymore.
Well, and that's the thing I think is really important because, as you said, you have this big vision. And some of the things that I also think that people get caught up in, and you touched on it, is they want it all planned out here, right?
Yes.
They want the answers here. And I'll take you for an example. When I started the Word Blindness podcast, so it's been last August, so we're 46 episodes and we're in season 2. So one of the things that when I started it, I approached Brent and I said, I really want to help you with the foundation, the dyslexia. How can I help? I can give my time, but I actually am pretty good at podcasting. I know what to do. You know, I've now been doing this since 2019. So let me, you know, can we start something? And he was like, no, I don't, you know, no. Finally, he was like, yes. And he is more of a realist. Some people want to call it negative, but he really talks about the real side of dyslexia and the hard times and all of these things, where a lot of stuff out there with dyslexia is talking about the positives, the higher IQs, the billionaires, the CEOs. All that's great. Like, you know, when you have a kid that's getting diagnosed, you want to show them the stories. But when they're in the weeds of it, you also want to show them you know what? There's other people that are going in the weeds, right? There are other people that are having these situations. It's not just over here. You want all of it. So when we started the podcast, I remember, and I don't do this often. I am pretty good because, again, of all the work that I've done internally on my own, you know, just because of who I am. But I started to be like, oh, okay, am I taking on too much? Is this a smart idea? Is this a good idea? This is before I started with Vet Tech, but right before, you know, I have, you know, I'm doing the coaching and it's the storytelling consultancy. This is really like working well. Why am I adding something else? I needed to kind of question myself because sometimes I do that. I'll take more things on sometimes when I'm in a really good spot, but it's because I'm like a little bit bored. Then I'm like, oh, let me take something else on. And that sometimes is not healthy. Like I need to be like, okay, no, focus on what you're doing now, see it through and you know, and not add too many things to your plate because that's not healthy. You can't do it all, right? So I've
Right.
had to do that work. So all of a sudden I remember sitting there and stopping, and I had just started hot yoga, and which I've done now with my age and hormones and all of these different things. I was kind of in that, like, kind of spinning, and I was like, oh my gosh. And I remember I stopped and I was like, don't put any pressure on yourself. Don't
Yeah.
put any, there's no goals with this. Just go with it. Just enjoy it. Have fun. Don't have
Yeah.
any expectations. Don't
Mm.
put expectations on this. You don't know what you know what you want it to be. You want to help people and all that, but don't put the expectations on it. And when I said that
Right.
to myself, I just breathed and I was like, you know what? If
Yeah.
we just start recording and it doesn't go well, I learned something, right? If it
That's
goes
right.
well and we do 5 episodes, that's what it's meant to happen. But I'm
That's
not
right.
going to put the expectations of like, oh my gosh, I have to do this. I have to do this. And that
That's
was a
right.
really big thing. I just remember just feeling the weight lifted. And
Oh,
and then anytime I would start to spin for a second, I would be like, no expectations. And it was like,
that's
great.
great. And isn't that amazing that 2 words, no expectations, can literally, my Zoom, I swear my Zoom likes to send balloons when it likes something I say.
That's so funny. I love it.
I don't know how to turn it off. Right? No expectations. The minute that you say that, your body, your physical nervous system expands, right? You can feel it physically and emotionally, just those 2 words, right? Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you.
But it's not even Zoom. This is Riverside. So I think it's your computer likes to hear. I will get sometimes this weird thumbs up, or I've gotten balloons sometimes. And sometimes I'm like, hey, how about you don't do that? Like
I
I'm
mean,
recording a podcast, but it is kind of funny. Yeah.
it is funny. And because it does it at
At a very,
exactly the perfect time.
yeah. It's like, oh yeah, I like that.
Yes, yes. But that's a beautiful illustration of what happens when you intentionally and consciously plug yourself in right there. That was a pattern interrupt.
Yep.
Okay. That's the I step right there.
Oh, I love
You
that.
caught yourself in the familiar, thoughts. That's M step. Familiar body sensations, right? Tightness, restrictiveness, familiar emotion. And you said, nope, not going there. And you intentionally plugged yourself into that mantra, which is no expectations. And all of a sudden, you single-handedly change the energy inside your body.
Yeah.
That's amazing, right? The power that we all have to be able to do that. That's it right there.
Yeah. I love that. Okay, so we're coming up on the end. Take us, is there anything you want to add, anything you want to leave, anything where people can find you? I know you have your website. Again, they can find you on LinkedIn, Instagram, Dethroning Your Inner Critic,
Yes.
Amazon for your book. They can find your podcast, Dethroning Your Inner Critic, on all podcast players.
Yes.
Anything else you want to kind of leave people with?
I do. So, you can also find my book on Audible, but
I love that.
Yeah, but I created a free assessment called the Inner Critic Assessment. You can find it at innercriticassessment.com. And what it does is it walks you through an assessment that will break down your specific pattern of thoughts and beliefs into 5 different inner critic types. And you'll get a whole report about what percentage of the time you're in that specific inner critic, right? Now, I will tell you the percentages, some people are I'm in 75%, guilty and 75% inadequate, right? So it's like, it gives you out of the 100%, how much of your time are you in that particular inner critic? 5 different inner critics. Why is it there? What possibly first triggered it? Right? How does it impact you? How does it impact others? It's a really comprehensive report. Innercriticassessment.com.
Perfect.
Yes.
Well, thank you.
And it's free.
And right. I love that. And
Yes.
this will be also in the show notes. So anyone that's like, please don't as you're driving.
Yeah.
Stop and
Yeah.
pull this. You can pull it up later. You'll see it.
Right.
So,
Right.
I mean, Joanna, thank you again for joining Your Next Stop. Always amazing. Always love what you're doing.
Thank
I
you.
love being surrounded with people that also are just not sitting around being like, well, I guess this is life. This is like you're exploring. You want to be better. You want to make other people's lives better. And that's,
You.
that's another reason why you and I just connect, because that's what we're about. It's not
That's
just,
right.
it's like we're doing the work on ourselves, sometimes not even realizing it, but it's because we want to impact a greater audience to be better people.
For sure. Thank you so much for having me. I love just listening to all the incredible things that you're doing with your life too. And you're such an inspiration. It's amazing.
Thank you. You guys know what to do. Like, rate, review, and share. You don't know who needs to hear this. You don't know who's sitting there kind of being like, I'm stagnant in my life. I don't know where I need to turn here. This episode can actually change someone's life. So don't forget to like, rate, review, and share. And thank you again for joining another episode of Your Next Stop.